In this video, you will understand why solder paste viscosity is to blame. Solder paste viscosity in electronics manufacturing is very important, and I strongly recommend watching this video until the end. I will explain why it's essential to choose solder paste with the right viscosity index by Malcom for your specific tasks, and what kind of defects you will face after PCB reflow if you ignore this parameter. Solder paste viscosity types. It's very simple. The lower the viscosity index, the more fluid the solder paste. The higher the viscosity index, the thicker the solder paste. For dispensing with syringes or needles, low and medium viscosity solder pastes with a Malcom viscosity index from 900 to 1800 are best, as they flow more easily through dispensing needles. Low and medium viscosity solder pastes are also used for high-speed printing, where the PCB quickly passes through soldering ovens on SMT line. Low and medium viscosity solder pastes have poorer shape retention. The higher room temperature, the faster the solder paste loses shape and spreads between PCB pads. For stencil printing, it's better to use a solder paste with a Malcom index of at least 1800. The solder paste printed through a stencil can maintain its proper shape for hours without spreading. That's why it's important to keep the right room temperature between 21 and 25 degrees Celsius for all types of solder pastes. Where to find the viscosity value? The viscosity index is rarely indicated on solder paste datasheet. If you can't find a datasheet for your solder paste online, you should think about what kind of trash you're planning to use for soldering your PCBs, because the datasheet must be published for all kinds of that products. Serious PCB assembly manufacturers use indium, castor, AIM and some other solder pastes, which must be stored in the refrigerator and mixed before use. What determines the viscosity of solder paste? The viscosity of solder paste directly depends on the flux it contains. Flux has a limited shelf life, 1 or 2 years, and flux properties deteriorate faster if stored improperly on its own or as a part of solder paste. That's why it's very important to mix the solder paste every time before use. During long storage, the flux can separate into fractions, so the paste must always be thoroughly mixed. If soldering paste stored incorrectly, some important components may evaporate, and the quality of flux inside the soldering paste will degrade significantly, which will affect your soldering quality. This is why it's important to follow the expiration date indicated on the jar. Defects due to incorrect viscosity. A common defect when using low and medium viscosity solder paste for stencil printing is solder bridges between pins, pads or deposits. You will be very disappointed if you install BGA chip on the low viscosity solder paste once the ball and the BGA chip stick together. You can't fix it. You will have to remove the BGA chip and repair the PCB. Another defect is the transfer of solder paste volume to adjacent pads. You will get different amounts of solder paste on the same PCB pads, which leads to Tombstone defect after melting and further rework. Video about Tombstone defect in the description. Why is the viscosity not indicated on cheap solder paste? A big problem is when people buy solder paste and don't realize the viscosity is a key parameter. Chinese manufacturers of cheap solder paste on popular marketplaces don't mention the viscosity index at all. For DIY segment, manufacturers omit this parameter so that people don't worry about unnecessary but very important details. The main goal is just to make people buy, not to care about quality or usability. As a result, people form a completely wrong understanding of solder paste and how to work with it. I have heard many discussions about which solder paste people like more, liquid or thick, and how to make solder paste thinner after long storage. They completely ignore the real criteria that matters in professional electronics manufacturing. Just in case, additional video about soldering paste in the description. Share in the comments what mistakes you have made when working and melting soldering pastes. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. I have a lot of interesting content for you. In the description you will find links to my Instagram and Telegram. I also provide PCB assembly services and consulting for electronics manufacturers. Also link to soldering fluxes, diamond flux for soldering and repairing electronics. Thank you for watching. See you next video.